Good evening, this is Lawrence Fromer, and welcome to Culture Connection. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski, and now in its 7th year at the Queen's Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Cultural Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Tonight, in honor of Halloween, we are pleased to welcome actor and much acclaimed voice artist Edoardo Ballerini, who will be reading selections from Edgar Allan Poe. A resident of New York, Edoardo Ballerini was a series regular in the critically acclaimed Quarry and has had recurring roles in The Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, 24, Elementary, and Ripper Street, among many other television credits. He has also appeared in several feature films, most memorably as the star chef in the indie cult classic Dinner Rush. In light of what he will be doing with us this evening on Culture Connection, I should tell you that he is also one of the leading lights for the burgeoning art form of audiobooks and narration. No less than the New York Times has referred to him as the voice of God. And having listened to his work myself a good deal, I can only agree. A 2-time winner of the Audiobook Publishers Association's Best Male Narrator Audie Award, he has recorded over 300 titles, from classics to bestsellers. In 2018, Ballerini completed a 135-hour recording of Karl Ove Knausgaard's acclaimed My Struggle. The following year, he recorded Robert Alter's translation of the Hebrew Bible in its entirety. He is a 2-time winner of the Society of Voice Artists Award and was recently named a Golden Voice by Audiophile magazine, an honorific that has been bestowed to only 35 actors in the magazine's 20-year history. This evening, Mr. Ballerini will be reading 2 of the best-loved and spookiest works from Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart and The Raven. There will be a limited question and answer period for our audience after the reading. And feel free to type your questions into the comments box, which you will see on Facebook. So let me just give a little explanation of the works. The Telltale Heart, the short story The Telltale Heart, was first published in 1843 and is considered a classic of the Gothic fiction genre. It is also a cautionary tale for anyone convinced they can commit the perfect murder. The Raven, first published in January of 1845, Poe claimed this poem, The Raven, was inspired in part by The Talking Raven and Barnaby Rudge, a tale of the riots of '80, which was a serialized novel published by Charles Dickens in 1840. And so now I'm going to hand you over to Edoardo Ballerini. It really is our great pleasure. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, and thank you for that very generous introduction. And with no further ado, The Telltale Heart. It's true, yes, I have been ill, very ill. But why do you say that I have lost control of my mind? Why do you say that I am mad? Can you not see that I have full control of my mind? Is it not clear that I am not mad? Indeed, the illness only made my mind, my feelings, my senses stronger, more powerful. My sense of hearing especially became more powerful. I could hear sounds I'd never heard before. I heard sounds from heaven, and I heard sounds from hell. Listen, and I will tell you how it happened. You will see, you will hear how healthy my mind is. It is impossible to say how the idea first entered my head. There was no reason for what I did. I did not hate the old man. I even loved him. He had never hurt me. I did not want his money. I think it was his eye. His eye was like the eye of a vulture, the eye of one of those terrible birds that watch and wait while an animal dies and then fall upon the dead body and pull it to pieces to eat it. When the old man looked at me with his vulture eye, a cold feeling went up and down my back. Even my blood became cold. And so I finally decided I had to kill the old man and close that eye forever. So you think that I am mad. A madman cannot plan. But you should have seen me. During all of that week, I was as friendly to the old man as I could be, and warm and loving. Every night about 12 o'clock, I slowly opened his door. And when the door was opened wide enough, I put my hand in, and then my head. In my hand, I held a light covered over with a cloth so that no light showed. And I stood there quietly. Then carefully I lifted the cloth just a little, so that a single thin small light fell across that eye. For 7 nights I did this, 7 long nights, every night at midnight. Always the eye was closed, so it was impossible for me to do the work. For it was not the old man I felt I had to kill, it was the eye, his evil eye. And every morning I went to his room, and with a warm, friendly voice I asked him how he had slept. He could not guess that every night, just at 12, I looked in at him as he slept. The 8th night I was more than usually careful as I opened the door. The hands of a clock move more quickly than did my hand. Never before had I felt so strongly my own power. I was now sure of success. The old man was lying there, not dreaming that I was at his door. Suddenly he moved in his bed. You may think I became afraid. But no. The darkness in his room was thick and black. I knew he could not see the opening of the door. I continued to push the door slowly, softly. I put in my head. I put in my hand with the covered light. Suddenly the old man sat up in bed and cried, "Who's there?" I stood quite still. For a whole hour I did not move, nor did I hear him again lie down in his bed. He just sat there, listening. Then I heard a sound, a low cry of fear, which escaped from the old man. Now I knew that he was sitting up in his bed, filled with fear. I knew that he knew that I was there. He did not see me there. He could not hear me there. He felt me there. Now he knew that death was standing there. Slowly, little by little, I lifted the cloth, until a small, small light escaped from under it to fall upon that vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and my anger increased as it looked straight at me. I could not see the old man's face, only that eye, that hard blue eye, and the blood in my body became like ice. Have I not told you that my hearing had become unusually strong? Now I could hear a quick, low, soft sound, like the sound of a clock heard through a wall. It was the beating of the old man's heart. I tried to stand quietly, but the sound grew louder. The old man's fear must have been great indeed, and as the sound grew louder, my anger became greater and more painful. But it was more than anger. In the quiet night, in the dark silence of the bedroom, my anger became fear. For the heart was beating so loudly that I was sure someone must hear. The time had come. I rushed into the room, crying, "Die! Die!" The old man gave a loud cry of fear as I fell upon him, and held the bed covers tightly over his head. Still his heart was beating, but I smiled as I felt that success was near. For many minutes that heart continued to beat, but at last the beating stopped. The old man was dead. I took away the bed covers and held my ear over his heart. There was no sound. Yes, he was dead. Dead as a stone. His eye would trouble me no more. So I am mad, you say. You should have seen how careful I was to put the body where no one could find it. First, I cut off the head. Then the arms and the legs. I was careful not to let a single drop of blood fall on the floor. I pulled up 3 of the boards that formed the floor and put the pieces of the body there. Then I put the boards down again, carefully, so carefully that no human eye could see that they had been moved. As I finished this work, I heard that someone was at the door. It was now 4 o'clock in the morning, but still dark. I had no fear, however, as I went down to open the door. 3 men were at the door, 3 officers of the police. One of the neighbors had heard the old man's cry and had called the police. These 3 had come to ask questions and to search the house. I asked the policeman to come in. The cry, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man, I said, was away. He had gone to visit a friend in the country. I took them through the whole house, telling them to search it all, to search well. I led them finally into the old man's bedroom. As if playing a game with them, I asked them to sit down and talk for a while. My easy, quiet manner made the policeman believe my story. So they sat talking with me in a friendly way. But although I answered them in the same way, I soon wished that they would go. My head hurt, and there was a strange sound in my ears. I talked more and faster. The sound became clearer, and still they sat and talked. Suddenly I knew that the sound was not in my ears. It was not just inside my head. At that moment I must have become quite white. I talked still faster and louder, and the sound, too, became louder. It was a quick, low, soft sound, like the sound of a clock heard through a wall, a sound I knew well. Louder it became, and louder. Why did the men not go? Louder, louder. I stood up and walked quickly around the room. I pushed my chair across the floor to make more noise, to cover that terrible sound. I talked even louder, and still the men sat and talked and smiled. Was it possible that they could not hear? No, they heard. I was certain of it. They knew. Now it was they who were playing a game with me. I was suffering more than I could bear from their smiles and from that sound. Louder, louder, louder. Suddenly I could bear it no longer. I pointed at the boards and cried, "Yes, yes, I killed him. Pull up the boards and you shall see I killed him." But why does his heart not stop beating? Why does it not stop? And now, the raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger. Hesitating then no longer, "Sir," said I, or "Madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven, of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unversiful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he has sent thee, respite, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aiden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul, from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore. The end.
Well, I'm mesmerized, just like everyone else. And I'm looking at everything here in the comments from people, and it's just one gushing. It's amazing. They're all just like, going nuts for you here. The golden voice. I feel that I'm there. I love listening to Eduardo's voice. I mean, this is
Oh,
just
well,
over and
thank you,
over again.
everyone.
It's like
I am
the,
always
the
blessed to read things like Edgar Allan Poe. I always say that makes what I do a lot easier when you have incredible writing. So,
really, really, it's so true, right? Everyone's just they're like, Shh, I'm listening with my eyes closed. Bravo, applause, bravo, bravo, bravo. Someone in Galveston, Texas, sending you. Now, here's somebody who she just said she had worked with you at
okay,
Sullivan Talent years ago.
okay.
Lorraine Coffey, I guess I can say. And she was
Hello,
just saying
Lorraine.
how wonderful it was to hear you. And you're, so
Are there any
um,
questions that we can get to? Is there anything like
I'm
that?
just going,
Let
yeah,
me see.
are you able to see them in all in the comments yourself? Because it's mostly like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Well, if people have questions,
Wonderful,
they
wonderful,
can post
wonderful.
them. We'd be happy to
And
discuss.
yes, out
I will
there, if
start
you have
this off by
specific
saying,
questions
I
about,
was remembering today when I first encountered Poe, and it was a very strange occurrence. I was somehow in an empty apartment after my first year in college. I think my father was moving from one apartment to the next, and no furniture had been brought over yet. So I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and the only thing I had was the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe. For some reason, that was the only book I had. And this was, pre-internet,
oh
obviously, and there
wow.
was no television. So it was me, a mattress, an empty apartment, and a week of Edgar Allan Poe. And it just flashed back to me today that I think I read all of his stories in that time. Um,
And were you
yeah,
scared
yeah.
to death by the end of the
Being
week?
in an empty apartment alone is a kind of creepy experience, right? And everything sort of echoes. And but that was my first encounter with Poe. I was, 18, 19 years old, and I remember just being mesmerized by him. Yeah.
That would do it, right? You just get lost in it. Okay, here is somebody. My questions for Edoardo
Uh,
Ballerini are the following. So I guess there's more
Okay.
than one. You rehearse it all before reading a recording session.
Yes, I do, especially something like this. But when it comes, if you're asking about longer form narration, like a full audiobook, then it's difficult to rehearse in the traditional sense. You want to familiarize yourself with the text, certainly, but it's too long a thing to rehearse, a 300-page novel. But when it comes to poems and short stories, absolutely. I've been reading these, every day for the last few days to make sure I was ready for this, and it makes a big difference.
Well, and this one you've recorded in the past, right? I understand.
I have. I
I,
did record this in a
yeah,
few Poe short stories.
I
So
listened to the recording.
yeah,
Certainly, it's.
yeah,
And I just have to say, I listened to your recording. We had Andre Asimel on the show
yes.
this summer, and I interviewed him, and I listened to your recording of his new audiobook novella, and it was just magnificent.
Oh, thank you. And Andre,
I really,
again, it helps to have great writers, doesn't it?
well, yes, and he's certainly a good one.
Yeah.
So then the other question was, uh, any tips you can share about how to make reading out loud more engaging for the listener? I think that's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. Narration is just another branch of acting. That's the way I think of it. And so you have to, just the way in front of a camera or on a stage, you have to immerse yourself in the character and the piece. The same thing happens here. It's just a different branch of the same tree. You're just in front of a microphone instead of a camera or on a stage. And so I find that the more you can dive in and sort of commune with the text, the more that you will take the cues from the writer, and you will find this kind of back and forth relationship with the text between what you are getting and what the writing is giving you, and it becomes a very dynamic and fluid experience between the two. I saw a question here that actually is sort of will piggyback onto this. Somebody asks, "What are some of the most challenging works for you?" And I did that. You mentioned the Karlova Knausgård, which was 3,500 pages. It's very Proustian and very long, and it took years to complete. And that, I would say, tops my list of things that were challenging, in that I got so into it that it was almost difficult to come out of it. It was almost like sort of method acting. I was sort of playing this man. But I think that's when you can connect in that way, that's where you'll find your greatest success.
Well, it's interesting that you said about method acting. I'm wondering, because you are also, of course, an actor, and we've all seen you in many wonderful things. When you are doing these audiobook recordings, I mean, do you approach characters like an actor, and do you break it
I
down?
do. I do. I absolutely do. The difference is that you're playing all the parts, right?
Right.
Instead of one. And so I
You
very
know,
much
you have like 50,
right, I
right?
know. And I curse those writers that like to put, 12 characters in one room and one scene because it's
Oh
just
God.
impossible for the narrator. But to answer your question, no, I very much, sort of cast the characters in my head, and I want to
Okay.
have an idea of them. And so as I'm going through the book, I'm sort of playing them, and you're flipping between characters that way.
Someone asked, "What's your favorite Poe story or poem?"
Well, The Raven is, by far. It's hard to go to go
Right.
wrong with The Raven. And Telltale Heart, we selected this, so is easily one of my favorites. The Fall of the House of Usher is wonderful. Annabelle is also wonderful. And the nice thing about Poe short stories is that they are indeed short. Most of them run sort of 5, 10, no longer than 15, 20 pages. So they're very kind of, consumable in that way. You can just sort of read one here and there, which I would highly recommend, especially tomorrow on Halloween.
Oh, for sure. Um, okay. Someone is asking,
Mhm.
they're a fellow narrator,
Uh-huh.
and they're curious about your daily routine when you're recording a book.
That's a great question. Um, the daily routine has kind of been blown up in this pandemic time because the daily routine used to be a kind of 9 to 3 schedule in a studio, and I would have a routine of, breakfast at a certain time and driving over and sort of getting my head cleared and going into the studio and working solidly. That now that I work from home, I'm actually in my studio, um, and I work at different hours and at different times, and in sort of a couple of hours here, often at night. So that routine has unfortunately disappeared. But I will say this: is that I always, before I start, it's it's like being backstage when you're waiting in the wings and you're waiting for your cue, you're waiting for the curtain to go up. I always have a moment before I start a session where I just sit quietly and just sort of mentally prepare myself for what I'm about to do. It's much harder than people realize, and it requires a concentration and an effort that I think people might not understand. And so I really try to get into that headspace before I start. So if I have a routine that has lasted, it's to take that quiet moment before I start work.
Okay. And it's interesting too because I now know more and more, people who do seem to do voiceover work even from their own homes. Like a
Hmm.
lot of the actors I know, that's very common now, right?
Hmm.
Home.
Oh yes, every actor I think has some sort of home studio.
Well, I can remember back in the day, just as an aside here, that they would say, well, if you want to do any of these other things, whether it's jingles or voiceovers or hand modeling, it's really a whole separate career in addition to your acting career,
Right.
and it's at least 2 years to put that together. And I mean, do you feel that as well? Is it's kind of like, I mean,
About
because you still act as well, right?
Well, nobody's acting much these days.
Well, yeah, okay, true,
But
but
yeah, no, I think the last film I was in was about 3 years ago.
okay.
So it's been a little while, but I by no means have stopped, pursuing that. Um, I do feel like it's just another version of the same art form. And when I understood that, my understanding of narration really changed. Is that I really understood it to be a performance, as opposed to, let's call it a reading, right? Where you're simply sort of mechanically saying the words, where you're
Right.
really having to engage with the text and perform it. And when I understood that, it brought it to a whole new level. And quite frankly, it made it a lot more satisfying artistically and creatively, um, to do it with that approach.
There are people who really now refer. I mean, I knew about books for the visually impaired years ago, down at the Library of Congress and stuff. But it really does. I think you can make the case this is really a whole new art form in many ways. Would you agree? And
Yes and no. I would say that storytelling and narration is actually as old as sand.
or
In that respect, no. And certainly there have been recordings, which have been ever since people figured out how to record things onto wax. People have been recording works. But what I will say, the yes part of my answer is that I do feel like we're in a kind of golden age of narration right now, and we can credit technology to some degree. We can also credit, people's different changing habits and what kind of media they want to consume. But I also think we have to credit a lot of actors who have come into this field. And, people who know narrators know that a lot of the top narrators are, they've come from Juilliard, they've come from Yale, they've come from UCLA, they've come from NYU. They work on Broadway, they work in film and TV. And I think there's a whole new level of performer that has come into it in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, which has really upped it. And I think it's exciting because it pushes the art form. It's like it has to be, better and better and better. Just like any other art form, it has to constantly sort of renew itself and engage an audience. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now. And there's still a long ways to go with this kind of growth that this industry is having.
well, speaking of the exceptional talent, every so often you hear, I think, Martin Sheen's voice a lot. For a long time, Barbara Feldon evidently had cornered the market on a lot of the female voice work
Okay.
in the country, et cetera. So does that make it harder for the new kid on the block?
You're talking about you're talking about commercial voices, or you're talking about narration voices?
voiceover work,
Yeah,
I guess. I'm
yeah. I
thinking
mean,
more.
that's a whole other kettle of fish. It's the celebrity kind of thing in the voiceover world. Um, no, I would say that the field is expanding so greatly that there's plenty of room in it, and more and more people are putting their things into audio. The Andre Aciman piece was very interesting in that it's audio only.
Right,
There was no
right.
print version of it, which I thought was really intriguing. Andre is a well-known, well-acclaimed international best-selling writer, and he wrote something solely for audio. So it kind of tells you where the publishing industry is going and where writers are going. So I no, that stuff doesn't. I think there's plenty for everyone.
Somebody's asking, is there a bust above your door?
Is there a bust above my door? Is there something behind me? Should I should
I
I be
don't
afraid?
know.
I
I
yeah.
am. His name is
There's not a bust above my
Barry
door.
your
We
door.
we do hear strange sounds in our house.
Oh,
We have an old house, and I will tell this two anecdotes actually about it very briefly. One of the first uh, inhabitants of this house was a silent movie actor named David Manners, and David Manners worked on occasion with Bela Lugosi. And so I like to think that some of that Bela Lugosi kind of energy kind of crept into here. And we have a very gothic looking wall in front of our house. The second one, which is kind of fun, is that so Jimmy Stewart, the great American actor, his sister lived in this house in the 50s and 60s, I believe. We have it on good authority that Stewart himself visited the house at least on one occasion. And so whenever we hear something funny in the house, we like to think that it's the ghost of Jimmy Stewart walking around. Uh, so
well,
yeah,
you could do worse.
yeah, you could do worse. Yeah. Anyway, no bust above the door, but those stories.
Okay. Uh, who has been your favorite character? And I don't know if this means in your uh,
Yeah.
theater work or in your record. I'll leave that up
Yeah.
to you. Is
Yeah. That can be answered many ways.
great,
Um,
great.
you mentioned a film I did, it's now 20 years ago, believe it or not, called Dinner Rush, which is still one of my favorites. And it's a great film that holds up very well, I will say. And I loved that character. He was this young man who was trying to get out from under his father's shadow and sort of create a restaurant world, and it was very exciting. And I loved that. And the other one that I loved was the work I did on The Sopranos. I really loved that character. He was such a bizarre character, even for that show. And to put it in some context, I was only in a few episodes for a handful of scenes, and yet everybody seems to remember that character from the show. And I think the credit goes to the writers and the directors they created this character that was so strange, even for that world. He was kind of different from those, Goomba kind of guys. And I loved that experience, and I loved the character, because people still ask me questions like, where was he from? What was he doing? Where was he going? How was he friends with him? It was really interesting.
No, I'm sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. My memory is he's kind of a drug
He's
addict,
a
and
junkie, yeah, and he gets the Christopher character hooked back on Smack.
every
Um,
so often because he's kind
right,
of a mess, right?
right. But I love that character. So I don't know if that's answering the question appropriately. It's hard to answer what's your favorite character in books, because there are so many characters within the books. Um, I will say that I had the great experience of recording War and Peace this year, and if you can consider the book a character, that is, I mean, that is an absolute masterpiece, which was an absolute privilege to narrate.
Okay, one second. I just want to. Somebody's saying, and I can't answer this. The version of the Telltale Heart,
Mm. Oh, I see
not.
it. Yeah, the original text.
Is that
What
true?
these stories, it may well be true. These stories from the 1840s often have several versions of them. What you'll find often is that they appeared in a weekly or a newspaper at first. Then they were published in book form. So scholars will dispute often sort of what was meant to be in the original, what was not meant to be in the original. They got edited by newspaper editors at times. I am not a Poe scholar, so I'm not going to really speak to that. The decision, if there was one, was that it was the one that came up off of Gutenberg, which is has all the public domain stuff. So that's how that decision was reached. But it is
Okay.
interesting the way these stories get. I was
Well,
reading
yeah,
Jack. Yeah, I was
actually,
reading a Jack London thing recently, and he complains about how people change this stuff.
So when you're recording a book, do you often touch base with the author as you're recording it?
That's a great question. And I can say that happens more and more often, to the point we were making earlier about how the industry is changing and how writers are getting more involved with how their book is being done in audio. It happens more and more often. And I actually have some very good friendships now with some of the authors, including Andre. Andre and I speak all the time. I'm about to do another work of his, a man named Jess Walter. Jess and I did his book, Beautiful Ruins, and now I just did The Cold Millions for him. And, we text each other, like we're sort of old buddies. And it's really kind of cool. So there is more of that. There is more of that that's happening.
Well, I guess maybe delving a little deeper. I mean, do you talk to them and say, okay, I want to make sure that I represent, what's really going on here, or what
Yeah,
do you?
that does happen. Often that happens if you work with them a second time. On the first book, you're kind of not necessarily put in touch with the author, or the author doesn't necessarily want to be a part of it. But often when you get to the second volume, then you have some kind of relationship because they know of you having done their work, and they've probably heard feedback about what you did with their work. And so then the relationship kind of starts from there. I find it enormously helpful. Jess Walter and I had very long conversations about The Cold Millions, his book that just came out. And it was great. And it was really exciting to work that way. It was this collaborative. I felt like I had a director. I felt like the author was kind of live directing me through his work.
I'm wondering if that can ever get difficult, where some of the authors says that, no, that's not at all what
I'm sure it's inevitable, right?
Right.
I'm sure somebody has heard their work in audio and thought, "Oh my God, this is terrible." Yeah.
Now, this is interesting too, because we're talking, I think, about the having the meaning behind something, and have you ever had to record a piece that you had no affinity for?
I'm going to say yes, and I'm not going to say what it is.
Yeah, and I won't pry then. Okay.
Yeah, and I will say that it was early in my audio career, when I was trying to sort of get established, that you kind of take anything you can. And yes, there were a couple that I really just did not like.
So how did you deal with it, or
You know,
not?
you
I
have
mean,
to be a professional. You have to approach it and serve the author as best you can. I mean, it's no different than if you're in a TV show or a film and there's a scene which you don't really like. You think this isn't right for my character, let's say, and you hear about, actors and directors and writers like getting in fights or whatever. That's not going to happen here, obviously. But you approach it as a professional. You just say, I'm here to do the best I can with this. And I hope I did.
what do you do if you encounter? You're reading this and you're like, I have no idea what this really means, or what is really going on here, or what's motivating these
Yeah, I
people.
have that's happened a couple of times, and I've turned to the producers on occasion to ask them what they think is happening. When you're working through a publishing house like Penguin Random House or Hachette or whatever it is, there's a producer on the project, and so I have said, "Can you explain what's happening here? Because I don't quite get it," and that's been helpful too. There is more of a collaborative process than people might think.
I used to sometimes write copy for a gallery, and artists and architects, and I work with both, love to give you stuff that is like so poetic. You're like, wait, is there something in here that I can, and I'd have to really dissect it, and so I could, say
Right,
this is what this means,
right,
and
right,
straight, English or what have you,
right.
and that was always an interesting challenge. Okay, let's see. Oh, someone says Dinner Rush pops up on my Ballerini TV at least once a week. Is there a Ballerini
I,
channel?
I did not know of such a thing. I doubt it. I'm guessing it's just an alert set up, but that's cool.
Uh, they saying, how is the Bible coming along? I thought you already.
Yeah, the Bible
Oh,
is
are you on
done.
to the New Testament now? Or
But no, the Bible is done. It was John Aaron, an old friend
yeah,
of mine. Hello, John. The Bible is done. It came out.
2,000 years ago, at least.
It
No.
came out earlier this year.
That you did the Hebrew Bible, or did you do also the New
No,
Testament?
the Hebrew Bible. It's
Right.
the new translation, Robert Alters, which I found to be very poetic and quite beautiful. And actually, if I can say this, sort of more readable than other versions of the Bible, the King James in particular. I will confess that some of that genealogy can really bog you down
Yeah.
when you've got to get through 4 pages of names. But the stories, I found they were treated quite beautifully. It was an amazing experience. It took a long time. We took it, very slowly and wanted to go very carefully with it. But it's out there. Oh, and I will tell this quick little anecdote that somebody said. They wrote me to say that they were listening to, I think they said it was Joshua, the book of Joshua, while they were driving in their car. And then he said that he got an idea for a TV series off of it while he was listening to the recording, because something had happened around him, something like some motorcycles or something went by. And I just love this idea of, somebody listening to my recording of the book of Joshua, driving along a highway and thinking, I got an idea for a TV series. And I love this idea that these things are interconnected in this way.
Mark,
That the listening experience becomes part of our lives. That was very exciting to me.
the Hebrew Bible, that's a substantial read.
Yeah, there is a lot you can skip over. As I say, the genealogy, you can just whip through that.
Sure, all the begats.
All the begats, yeah.
Uh, okay. Oh, speaking of Corky from The
Ah,
Sopranos, the character.
yeah.
Uh, okay, well, if I don't know if this is too personal, but what was your personal backstory for him? Such a haunting portrayal.
Um, I'll tell who asked this. I don't know this person. Here's what I'm going to say: is I'm going to push that question off because I'm hoping that my old friend Michael Imperioli, who played Christopher, who is now doing the Talking Sopranos podcast, which is a big hit, I think I may be invited on as a guest to talk about this. So I'm gonna save that for Michael and
Okay, so
Steve
stay
Sharippa.
tuned for the Talking Sopranos podcast.
Yeah, it's great. It's really
And
good.
hopefully you're going to be on it, and you'll share that story.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold that one for there. I think it'd be
All right. Well,
it'd be unfair to Michael and Steve Sharippa to tell it here.
now we all have something to look forward to then.
Yeah.
Regarding the Ballerini TV, it says my husband set up my smart TV and named a channel Ballerini TV. Anytime any of your films show anywhere in the world, it channels to my channel.
Wow.
Well, I would say that is like a real fan.
I didn't know you could. Marissa, I know Marissa. Yeah. I didn't know you could do that, but that is incredibly flattering. Thank you. And I'll have to look into that myself to see if I can find out when things of mine are running. I see something at the bottom there. Can you tell us about some upcoming projects? Okay. Yeah, I can. So one that I think I mentioned, I'm doing another work with Andre Osman. That's some essays of his, so nonfiction. But then one that I'm very excited about is I recorded Jack London's semi-autobiographical Martin Eden, it's called. Jack London is best known for The Call of the Wild and White Fang, but this I think is really one of his under-the-radar masterpieces. It's a beautiful book. It's the story of him as this rough sailor from the Oakland docks becoming a writer. And it's a novel that meant a lot to me when I was in college. And there's actually a film of it right now. It's an Italian movie of it out. When I saw that this film was coming out, it inspired me to go ahead and record it. So it's going to be out in a couple of weeks. So I hope people will look for it. It's a very personally important novel to me. And so I wanted to get to do that.
Let me just see. Well, now you had mentioned Italian connection on this, and I believe your parents you're from Italy.
My father. Yeah,
he's a pretty well-known poet over there, isn't he?
My father is a poet, a well-known poet. My mother is American. She is an art historian and a writer herself. So I come from this very academic background.
Did you grow up here or there or both?
I mostly in New York City. I spent my summers in Italy. So it'd be school year, New York, summers in Italy. It was a great way to grow up. I grew up bilingual, and I still have a lot of friends in Italy. And so, I'm very much connected to it.
Have you recorded in Italian ever?
I've never recorded in Italian. I did a directing project in Italian for Audible Italia, but I've not recorded anything. I'd like to. So we'll see if maybe I can get that going this year.
Have you done a reading of your father's works at all?
I have not. No. No.
Still waiting to be asked, huh?
That's good. Yeah. He knows where to find me, so he should.
Right. Don't call us. We'll call you. Do you have a preference between fiction and nonfiction?
I don't actually. I do mostly fiction. That is most of the market. I've done a lot of nonfiction, and I always felt that it was great because I was sort of getting paid to learn something that I was interested in learning anyway. There was one in particular I did a history of Venice, and Venice, Italy is one of my favorite spots in the world. And there was this like 400 page sweeping history of Venice, and it was just amazing. I loved it. But mostly fiction. I think that's just because that's what the market offers.
Sure. Well, if you narrate an encyclopedia one day, let us know.
Right. Well, there were certain parts of the Bible that felt like an encyclopedia.
That would be all the gats and then some.
Right.
Let's see. Someone here is saying that they think that you would be a perfect narrator for Paul Auster. Have you ever read any of his stuff?
I have not read any of his stuff. I've met Paul Auster, but I have not read any of his stuff. Am I wrong in thinking that he read his own stuff? I feel like he did.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up, but thank you.
Okay, so from this person's mouth to Paul Auster's ears.
There you go.
And let's hope for that. Okay, now somebody here is saying, and you're going to have to fill me in on what exactly this means. Thank you for helping New Orleans rock the Votel.
The vote.
Oh no, New Orleans rocked the vote.
Exclamation point. Yeah.
Yes,
There was,
yes.
those Get Out the Vote campaigns that people put together. There was one for New Orleans that I was asked to contribute to. I shot a TV series in New Orleans. That's my connection. And so that's what that's about. And I hope, listen, I hope people vote. I'm going to leave it at that because I
Yeah,
don't.
well,
Yeah.
but what was the TV series in New Orleans?
Quarry.
Quarry. Okay.
Yeah, for Cinemax.
Okay, sure. Okay. Well, now somebody wants more details about the Bible recordings.
Well, the Bible, okay. How do we find it? Well, it's certainly available on Audible or through a company called Recorded Books. I believe also that libraries have it, and the way you can borrow an ebook from a library, you can take out an audiobook. So if, that's the easier way to go about it for a lot of people. So I would check local libraries online, and there might be a way to just download it there. So yeah, I was asked to do the Bible. I know we only have a few more minutes here, but I was asked to do the Bible a year and a half ago, I guess, and I was hesitant at first. It just felt like too monumental a work to sort of handle on my own. But then, we talked about it, and we had this great research team which helped with all the names and all of that. And Recorded Books is a very class outfit, I will say, and I knew they were going to handle it well. And I read some of the altar translation, and I was very moved by it. And so I took it on. It took a long time. It took a lot longer than a normal audiobook just because of the research and the names and all of that. But it was very much worth it. And I'm very proud of what we put together. I've gotten some, great feedback from listeners. And I confess, I was like, how many people are going to listen to a 60-hour recording of the Old Testament? And evidently a number of people have. So.
Well, wow. Oh, now I did not even know. What character did you play in I Shot Andy Warhol?
Wow, this is a deep dive into my career. I think I had 2 lines, and I think I was the editor of the school paper. It was one of the first things I ever did. It must have been in the mid-90s.
That you're supposed to be at Valerie Solanas' high school, or no?
I honestly can't remember. Might have been college. It was probably Solanas' college.
Okay.
And I just remember showing up. I lived down in the East Village in New York City, and I remember the location was up on like 114th Street or something. And I remember I didn't go to the Upper West Side very much back then, and I remember getting out of the subway at Columbia University and thinking, where the hell am I? It was like so foreign to me. I was such a downtown kid.
Right.
And it was one day, and it was just a few lines. And I remembered walking away thinking, oh, I guess I've been in a movie. It was that early in my career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I still have a few friends living in the Hotel Chelsea, in fact. And it's
on 23rd Street?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, it was always about half residential, half hotel. And
right, yeah.
Kind of been for 10 years trying to convert it into, something expensive. But there's still a few people there. And of course, I guess she haunts that place all the time. Let's see what else.
So are we at the end of our session, basically? Yeah.
We could have a few more minutes if we want. I'm trying to see if anything else.
Well, I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to you and to everybody who put this together. It's always exciting for me to do live readings. I know we have to do them in this different format now, but I think they're great. I think giving a chance to hear Poe and other writers like this is wonderful. So my thanks to you and to everybody. And please everybody vote, and please everybody stay safe and take care of yourselves and take care of those around you. So with that,
thank you so much for being here. I hope that we can have you back again.
That'd be great.
I'm saying, I don't know, the Christmas Carol, the Bible.
Well, there's always around the holiday season. There's always stuff we could do.
There's so much that could happen here.
Right.
And I really do encourage you all to listen to Eduardo's recordings. He really is the most magnificent voice. So I think that we will. This seems to be a natural place to end it tonight. I want to wish everybody a happy Halloween, although it's, somewhat muted this year, I think. But, we've found our way to celebrate tonight.
Yeah.
I want to say it was not at all planned that I showed up in orange and you showed up in black. But
Hey, look at that. We're color coordinated for the season. It works. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining.
Good night, everybody.
All to check the Facebook page and the website of the Queens Public Library to find out what our next programming will be. Thank you, everyone, and happy Halloween.
Good night.